All right. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Everybody awake today? Yeah? Who read the Torah portion this week? Like birds. Chirp, 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 chirp. Crickets. No, glad to see you guys studied. Well, today's Torah portion we're going to talk about is Lech Lecha. And if you did study it, you're going to figure out pretty quick that it is jam-packed full of all kinds of stuff. Primarily, we're going to be talking today about the first parts of it, where it's talking about Abraham's life before he was Abraham. We're going to be reading from Genesis 12 all the way through 17. We're going to have the Haftarah of Isaiah 40 and 41. We're going to be in the Brit and Acts, Romans, Galatians, Hebrews, and any other thing I can think of. So, let's get started here. We're going to start in Genesis 17:5. It says, "Now Abraham is the father of a multitude of nations and represents not only Judaism, but also the believers in Yeshua and also the Muslims through Ishmael." You guys know that, right? "And no longer is your name called Abram, but your name shall be Abraham, because I shall make you a father of many nations." Genesis 17:5. Romans 4:16 says, "On account of this, it is of belief that it be according to favor for the promise to be made certain to all the seed, not only to those who are of Torah, but also to those who are of the belief of Abraham, who is the father of us all." Again, Romans 4:16. Interesting tidbit about Abraham. Abraham was actually born in the year 1948, following creation. Isn't that interesting? What other thing do we know that happened in 1948? It is the year that Israel was reestablished as a nation, correct? So here we have this parallel already between Abraham, the father of many nations, and the rebirth of the nation of Israel. Isn't that interesting? Some other interesting tidbits that you need to know. Noah was still alive until Abraham was about 60 years old, according to the genealogy. Shem, Noah's son, actually outlived Abraham and also would have known Isaac and Jacob. Shem, in fact, would have been able to meet 11 generations of his descendants. Shem would have shared with Jacob firsthand information about the world before the flood. Isn't that interesting? 11 generations of his descendants. You know, today, if you get to see your great-grandchildren, you consider it to be a blessing. But he would have seen 11. That would have been what? Great. I don't even, can't even count that far. Grandchildren. Genesis 12 says, "Get yourself out. And Yahweh said to Abram, go yourself out of your land for your relatives and from your father's house to a land which I show you." So, from his birthplace is what we're talking about. The fact is that he actually had already left. Did you know that? Because we read in Genesis 11:31 that Terah, his father, his actual destination was land of Canaan when he left Ur. It wasn't where he wound up. He was actually going to Canaan. So they had already left, was already on their journey when God called Abraham out of his father's house. See, Abraham's father stopped and dwelled in Haran. Now, it is believed that Terah most likely was the one who named that place Haran, as it was the name of Abraham's brother who fathered Lot. Terah died while they were still living in Ur, according to chapter 11 of Genesis. And next, Elohim tells Abraham to leave his father's house. So while Abraham's dad, Terah, was already on his way to Canaan, what made him stop? Why would he have stopped? Now, as a kid growing up, there's two types of dads out there. There's the dads that say, before you get in the car, you better go to the bathroom because we're not stopping until we get there. And there's the ones that say, well, we're going to stop here, we're going to stop here, we're going to stop here, we're going to stop here. Which one do you think Terah was? Pretty sure he had it in his mind to get there. Now, in a minute, we're going to look at how far that actually was and how long that actually took. Okay, it's not like they just walked up the street. It took a while. So what do you think made him stop? Well, let's find out. So Yahweh was telling Abram to come out, not only from Babylon, as Haran actually was still in the Babylonian Empire, along with Ur, where he was actually from, but also to leave his past, who he was, behind. Yahweh chose Abram, just as he was chosen each one of us. In order for Yah to use Abram and work through him, Abram had to leave his former state and walk in his calling. This was the very foundation of a Hebrew understanding of halakha. For those of you that don't speak Hebrew, that means walking out of the Torah. It's the halakha, how you actually do it, put it in practice. Abraham had to leave all the worldly security he had known and trust completely in El Shaddai in order to fulfill his calling and his destiny. So, they've already left home. They're in the middle of nowhere. And he gets called out of there, out of his father's house, the only secure place that he knows, because obviously they're not home anymore. And the only thing he has is God to trust. And that is how he called him. You think any one of y'all would have said, wait a minute. How are we going to get there? What are we going to do along the way? Let's find out how it went. Genesis 11:31 through chapter 12, verse 1. It says, and Terah took his son, Abram, and his grandson, Lot, who was the son of Haran, and his daughter-in-law, Sarai, his son Abram's wife, and they went out with them from Ur of the Chaldeans to go to the land of Canaan. See, they were on their way to Canaan, not Haran. And they came to Haran and dwelt there. And the days of Terah came to be 205 years, and Terah died in Haran. And Yahweh said to Abram, go yourself out of your land from your relatives and from your father's house. 205 years old is when Terah, Abraham's father, died. Remember that. Then he came out of the land of the Chaldeans and dwelt in Haran. And from there, after the death of his father, God removed him to the land which you now know. This is referred to Abraham. So, in Acts 7:4, it says that Abraham left Haran, the town, after his father passed. Correct? And in Genesis 11, we just read that Terah was 205 years old when he died in Haran, right? Well, we have a problem. We have a big problem. Because according to the genealogy, somebody just turned me down, or did my mic die? You hear me? Okay. According to the genealogy, Terah was 70 years old when Abraham was born. He was 70. You can read this in Genesis 11:26. And 205 years old when he actually died. You can read that at 11:32. Abram at this point, was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. You can read that in Genesis 12:4. Thus, if you take this, Terah was 70, and you add 75 to it, that's 145 years old. Not 205. That means that Terah was 145 years old when Abram departed. So why then does the Torah and the book of Acts say that Abraham's father died before his departure from Haran? Is Scripture lying here? Is there a contradiction? Anybody want to take a stab at it? I found this in Rashi. Those of you who don't know Rashi, he's an ancient sage, he's a rabbi, lived a long, long time ago, and I love to quote the rabbis when they agree with me. And I stole that from Brad, name dropper. Rashi says the text actually refers to Terah as dead. For wicked people are called dead even during their lifetime. For those of you that know about Near Eastern customs that are different than the West that we live in now, there are a few things that you could do to be considered to be dead to your family. A couple of things you can do. One of those things that it would cause a child to be disowned by his parents and be considered dead to them would be to do what? Anyone? How about turn away from the one true God and go into idolatry, right? Okay. Well, it stands to reason, and the Near Eastern customs will back it up. If a parent does that, the same thing applies. Now, one thing that we skipped over that you guys did not see in any of the text is that Abraham has another brother. There wasn't just two, there was three. And there's no mention of him coming out of Ur whatsoever with them. And there's no mention of him ever in the Torah about anything about him other than the record of when he was born. That is it. So since he's not mentioned, one might say that perhaps he too was considered dead. So, and this is a very interesting thing that I was looking at, if indeed he was 145 years old when Abram left, and he actually died at 205 years old, what the genealogy says, and if we want to go with the ideal that he could be considered dead because of something that he did, then I think we can make the conclusion that Terah must have been righteous at one point. Perhaps for the first 145 years of his life, he wasn't wicked. Because according to Rashi, if you turn to be wicked people, they'll be considered to be dead. So, perhaps for the first 145 years, he was righteous and not wicked. And at that point, turned wicked. So, my question to you is, what happened? If we're going to continue on this rabbit trail, what do you think happened? What would cause a man that from all outward appearances has everything to go from righteous to wicked? And I'm not meaning just a little wicked, so wicked that he gets disowned by his family and considered to be dead. What would happen? It's possible, very possible. What would happen? Let me put it to you in modern terms. What would cause you, as a Torah-observant Israelite, walking righteously, that have wife, children, grandchildren, big house, fancy cars, plenty of money, wealth, friends, influence, to give all that and turn it over and become wicked? What would cause you to do that? Pride? How about the death of your child? It's not really far-fetched, is it? You see and hear people all the time talk about it. Well, God, he took my mother or my father. He took my child. So there is no God. I will never serve a God that acts like that or would do that to that person was a saint and took him from me. If we hear that same reasoning today, what makes us think that back then the same thing wouldn't have been applied? I want you to think about that for a minute. Since we're talking about Ur, the place where they came from, the journey actually began in Ur of the Chaldeans, from the country of Babylon. Now, according to Easton, which is the 1897 Bible dictionary on Ur, Ur means light, or the moon city. It was also the birthplace of Haran, the man we're talking about that died. The principal commercial center of the country, as well as the central of political power. It stood near the mouth of the Euphrates and is represented by the mounds, that is, of brick and cement. Ur was a port of Babylon, whence trade was carried on with distant countries. It was home to the famous temple of the moon god, Sin. Now, isn't that interesting? It shared this honor, however, with another city, and this city was Haran. See, indeed, the temple of the moon god at Haran was perhaps even more famous in the Assyrian and Babylonian world than the temple of the moon god at Ur. At any rate, the two cities were bound together by the worship of the same deity. The closest and most enduring bond of union that existed in the ancient world. Terah should have migrated from the fact that he went from Ur to Haran, therefore ceases to be extraordinary. If he left Ur at all, it was most natural place to go, right? It was like passing from one court of a temple into another. So, on the screen here, I've got a picture of a ziggurat that is actually standing in what today is still known as Ur. It is believed that this temple, this place here, was the temple of the very moon god that we're discussing. Now, in case you're wondering where that is, on the right, you'll see that this is Saudi Arabia. Israel is here. And you will see right here is the Gulf, Persian Gulf. Right there is Ur, right on the edge. That's a long way from where they were heading, wasn't it? So, for the love of God, Matthew 10:37. He who loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. And he who loves sons or daughters more than me is not worthy of me. Now think about what I was talking about earlier. You think maybe this is alluding to the death of Terah's son, Haran? Perhaps Terah loved Haran more than he loved God, and therefore turned his back on him. It became the idolater that we all know him to be. Or do we really know that? See, tradition actually tells us that Abraham's father, Terah, was an idol maker, and that he actually worshipped that moon god. Note that in Genesis 12:1, Abraham is specifically told to leave his father's house. What a test for Abraham, right? To leave his father's house while he was still alive would have given the appearance of disrespect in those days. This would have caused Abraham to be disowned by his father by leaving before he died. So now we can understand why Abram, who rejected these gods, left his father and continued on to Canaan. See, I think that Abraham wasn't the only one that was chosen to go to Canaan. I think that possibly, can't prove this, but I'm going to speculate, that his father Terah was actually going to Canaan because God told him to. And before they left Ur, his son died. And between Ur and Haran, he came to despise God, settled in Haran, named that town Haran, and that's where he became the idol worshiper that we all know him to be from tradition. Can I prove it? No, I can't. But it's a very interesting thought. Extra biblical sources and reference provide us with additional information about Abram. This is where you're going to hear some interesting things. Now remember, these are extra biblical sources, all right? So keep them where they're supposed to be. From his early childhood and throughout his life, Abram was said to be a revolutionary and a rebel against the sophisticated yet often barbaric culture of the ancient Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Egyptians, and the Canaanites. Coincidentally, each one of these is actually descendant from the Ham. Did you know that? He traveled extensively and had an unquenchable passion to discover the mysteries of the Almighty. Abram's passion was to introduce Yahweh to the world. It is written that when Abram would come to a town, that he would stand in the town square, start calling for everyone to come and listen to him. He would ask, "What is the point of squandering your life on the pursuit of this world? Think about your purpose in life. The purpose is to find the one true Elohim." Abraham set the youth on fire with his ideas, and they would come running after him. Now, according to the Midrashic literature, Abram called people together in public meetings in Haran to proclaim the truth about the one Creator and to encourage the people to serve him. After these public meetings, he was willing to debate his claims with anyone who questioned him. In this way, he won thousands of followers who confessed the existence of the Creator Elohim. That's all out of extra biblical sources. So, since we've been talking about Haran, the man, let's talk about the place for a minute. Here we go. The Hebrew name for Haran is Haran. It is spelled Het, Resh, Nun. Now, if you know Hebrew and you put those letters together, you'll know that that spells something important. But according to the Strongs, Haran means crossroads. Isn't that interesting? Now think about what I was talking about before. That is where Terah decided he wasn't going to Canaan anymore, and Abraham listened to the call of God and decided that he would go. At a place that is interpreted as crossroads. Coincidentally, also in the Assyrian language, it is called a junction of trade routes, what we would call a crossroad. It's the place of decision. The numerical value of these letters, Het, Resh, Nun, is 258. And these letters can actually equate to a Hebrew word that is Hagiran, which means the threshing floor. Once again, you get this idea of separation. Where the grain is loosened from the chaff, you also can get the word Hagarim, which means the sojourners. And also Aharam, 'Aha,' 'Aha,' 'Aram,' 'Aha,' 'Aram,' 'Aha,' 'Aram,' 'Aha,' 'Aram,' 'Aha,' 'Aram,' 'Aha,' 'Aram,' meaning to be utterly destroyed. And also Aharar, 'Aha,' 'Aram,' meaning to be utterly You also can get the word Ve'il Barak, meaning to and to bless. So here Abraham was called, and he had to make a choice. Yahweh does the same exact thing for each one of us. When he calls us out, we have the same choice to make as Abraham. We're at a crossroads. Deuteronomy 30:19-20 says, I have called the heavens and the earth as witness today against you. I have set before you life and death, the blessings and curses, to dwell in the land which Yahweh swore to your fathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, and Jacob, to give them. Haran is actually located now in Syria. In addition to Abram and Sarai, this is interesting, Isaac's wife, Rebekah, was from Haran. Jacob lived there with Laban for 22 years after fleeing his brother Esau. In Haran, he actually married Leah and Rachel both. And all of his children, except for Benjamin, were born there. At a place that is translated as the crossroads. Each and every one of those people were at the crossroads, and they had to make a choice. Did they not? Did not Rebekah have to agree to go and leave and marry Isaac? Crossroads. Did not Jacob, after he worked there and married his 2 kids, did he not have to decide to leave also? On the crossroads. And all of the children too. They all had to decide to leave the crossroads. See, we all will come to the crossroads in our lifetime when we have to choose between Yahweh or the world. That's what it boils down to. We're all going to have to make that choice. Some of us have. Some of us are right in the middle of it. Some of us are coming to it. But we all will have to come through the crossroads, right? Lech Lecha. It was said by Rabbi Lodoviker Rabi that Lech Lecha, which means go to you, is the most important words that were ever spoken in history. With these words, God set Abraham on a course that would reverse the process of degeneration that humanity had been locked into ever since the expulsion from the Garden of Eden. A course that would eventually lead it to the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai, to life. Because they were given a choice. So, there are several characteristics of the faith of our father Abraham that are actually worthy of us to consider, since we're talking about him. And I don't know about you guys, but I have a hard time not calling Abram Abraham, and I get them, so bear with me if I get them out of sequence there, okay? First, Abraham's faith was obedient and produced works. That was the first thing we need to learn about his faith, of his character. He was obedient and it produced works. Secondly, as was Noah before him, Abraham was prompt. He responded without hand-wringing, without hesitation to the heavenly directive. He didn't say things like, Lord, do I really have to go down there? Are you sure? I don't speak so well. Yeah. Thirdly, his faith demonstrated intelligence and good reasoning. And lastly and finally, Abraham's faith was persevering and Abraham was patient. I don't know about you, but that's what I have probably the most struggle with. Patience. It's one that I struggle with. trusting that God will actually work things out in his own time and not mine. That's tough. You know, we all have a tendency to give things over to God and then pick them back up and try to work them out for him the way we want them to go. That's not being patient. So, are we being patient? For that matter, are we obedient? And are we producing good works, as our father Abraham did? I'm trying. Time is it? Okay. Genesis 12:2-3. Then I shall make you a great nation and bless you and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. And I shall bless those who bless you and curse him who curses you. And in you all the clans of the earth shall be blessed. In Genesis 12:2 here, Yahweh actually promises Abraham that he would become a great nation. A goy gadol. Now in Hebrew, the word goy is used for nations, but it can also mean Gentile, right? Non-Jewish, non-Israelite, okay? And Gadol means either big or great. So Abraham actually was, in fact, not a Jew. Sorry, guys. He was not an Israelite. He was not a Jew. He was just plain old Abraham. The important part of this equation is the covenant, not lineage. It's not about your lineage. It's about the decision you make to keep the covenant. And if you're wondering, that comes from Acts 3:25. So let's look at this first covenant of promise, shall we? The Hebrew word for blessing, I got it up there good. The Hebrew words for blessing may be actually changed to springs of water if you take a vowel point and you just move it right over on one little letter to the left. If you know anything about Hebrew, the vowel points point to how you actually pronounce, and also points to how what the word actually means, how it's what it means. So by taking the word for blessing and moving a vowel point just one little degree over, you change it to springs of water. Now, what's interesting about this is that in Scripture it says God is the source of all blessings, and it also says that Yeshua is the fountain of springs of living water. Isn't that interesting? Just by moving one little vowel point. This promise, which was extended to Isaac and then to Jacob and his descendants, was proven true throughout history, and it still holds true today. If you study European history throughout the centuries, it'll teach you one lesson. Those nations which have dealt fairly and mercifully with Israel have prospered. However, the nations which have oppressed and mistreated its people have written out their own curse. So let's look what it says to be blessed. Genesis 12:3. And in you all the clans of the earth shall be blessed. While this is an accurate mechanical translation, the Hebrew says actually much, much more here. From the Hebrew Torah, it reads, Va'ani baraku beka kol mishpakato ha'adamah. Now, that braku there, which is mostly translated as to say, be blessed, is an actual stem conjugated form of the root verb barak, which means to bless. Now, where am I going with all this tongue-twisting Hebrew, right? Well, according to the sages, the word braku, is specifically related to another stem conjugation, namely barik, which is, you can find it in the Talmud, which means to intermingle or to graft. You following me here? Now, Dr. Heidelheim explains it as this. This interpretation is inspired by the fact that nowhere else besides here in Genesis 12:3 do you find barak in the sense of blessing in the stem conjugation, while also in the sense of grafting in the common form. The meaning of verse 3 is perhaps better understood when translated as this: and in you all the clans of the earth shall be intermingled or grafted in. Wow. Isn't that amazing? Now, what scripture does that bring to mind when you hear that? Probably Galatians, Romans. Yeah. Right here in the Torah, it's already talking about grafting in through what? Through Abraham. Wow. What an amazing story. Sorry, guys, I have a bit of a cold this week. So remember earlier I was talking about Abraham was 75 years old when he left? 75. So why did God wait until he was 75? Why didn't he do it when he was 25? Would have been a lot easier for a young man to walk that far, right? Or why didn't he wait till he was 100? It would have been a lot more miraculous to walk that far at 100. But why 75 years old, right? Well, let's see. Let's read it. Genesis 12, 4 through 7. So Abraham left as Yahweh had commanded him, and Lot went with him. And Abraham was 75 years old when he set out from Haran. And Abram took Sarah his wife, and Lot his brother's son, and all their possessions that they had gathered, and the beings from whom they had acquired in Haran. And they set out for the land of Canaan. And they came to the land of Canaan, and Abram passed through the land to a place of Shechem, as far as the terebinth tree of Moreh. At that time, the Canaanites were in the land. And Yahweh appeared to Abram and said, to your seed I give this land. And he built there an altar to Yahweh who had appeared to him. 75 years old. Well, interesting thing about 75. If you look at the number 75 and you apply the gematria to it, and you look at it, there is several different words that actually have the numerical value of 75. One of them is spelled Kaf He Nun, which means Cohen. Now, if you know Hebrew, you already know that that means priest, right? It's also equal to batak, or to trust, as well as Hotakma, or wisdom, excuse me. So, why did he wait till he was 75? Thank you. Why did he wait till he was 75 years old? To show you who he really is. A priest that trusts and has wisdom. So note, interesting note here. The building of an altar. Remember that's what it said he did as soon as he got into Shechem, is that he built an altar right past the tree, right? The building of an altar or a religious structure in ancient times was a form of taking possession of a land. The message of the custom remains the same today. It is a statement of dominance. Now, what structure can you think of that has been built on a holy site that claim dominance can you think of right off the top of your head? Dome of the Rock, there's one perfect example. Asking, good. What else? This is prevalent. It's everywhere. So, you can see why that he built an altar to Yahweh in the land of Canaan at that moment. Why? Because he was showing that God is the one true God and that this land belonged to him. So, how far do you think it was from Haran all the way down there to Canaan, to Shechem, where they were? How far do you think that was? A couple miles? Right? Maybe it was 5 miles. They took a taxi. It took them like 10 minutes. How far do you think it was? Let's look. So before, when we talked earlier, this whole thing started out right here on Ur. And they left, and they made it all the way up here to Haran. Remember, they were supposed to be going over here to Canaan. They went all the way up here to Haran, and then from here, all the way down here to Shechem, which is in Canaan, right? And right now, they actually are positioned right here. What we would know as Beersheba. Pretty close to it, okay? Everybody know where they're at? Okay, so let's follow the journey. Abraham, in obedience, actually set out from the crossroads for a new life. They came to the land of Canaan. Canaan, coincidentally, literally means low land or humble. So why do you think Yahweh was taking them down there? The implication here is that of being a humble land or of learning humility in that place. Abraham passed through the land to a place of Shechem, as far as the terebinth tree of Moriah. Now, Shechem, coincidentally, and according to the Strongs, means upper back or shoulder. Right here. Okay? And it implies the carrying of a burden or the area that receives the lashings of punishment. If you were a slave and you're getting whipped, that's where they're whipping you at. The terebinth tree is actually the Hebrew word elon, which according to Strong's 436 means great tree or mighty man, and is a symbol of righteousness. And then Moreh is a Strong's number 4176, meaning teacher. So the place near or opposite the shoulder, Shechem, the place of the burden and punishment. Now remember Ephraim and all the burden and punishment that he went through. The place of the mighty teacher is the very first place that Abraham built an altar to Yahweh. Isn't that interesting? Today, this place is now a community, and it's called Elon Morai. And what does it mean? Place of the mighty teacher. To this very day. Isn't that interesting? They're all going, yeah, we lost you on the lost you on the if you know Hebrew, there's a lot of phlegm involved. So let's take a look at Shechem for a minute. Since he's down there, let's look at it. Let's see what the connection is to Shechem. Shechem is the city kingdom which did nothing when Jacob's daughter Dinah was kidnapped and defiled by the king's son, Shechem. It was Shechem that became the capital of the northern kingdom, house of Israel. Did you know that? After the breakup of the house of Jacob into two kingdoms, the king of Israel, Jeroboam, would defile the Torah. You see a correlation here. He would actually defile the Torah, the instructions, the right rulings, and judgments from Shechem by erecting false idols and building the first of two temples for the house of Israel to worship in order to keep them out of Jerusalem. And isn't that interesting? Shechem was indeed a mighty teacher. To the house of Israel, it was also from this city, after he had led the children of Israel into the land, that Joshua read the Torah, the blessings and the curses, between mountain of blessings and the mountain of curses, as Elohim commanded Moshe to direct him. Now, upon their return from Egypt, the children of Israel would lay Ephraim's patriarch father, Joseph, to rest in Shechem. This place has a lot of connections here. It would be our benefit to study more on Shechem, because when Yeshua leads us back to Israel to begin his millennial reign, he will most likely take us by there or through there, Shechem and El Moriah. whether it be physically or spiritually. You're going to have to go through that. Some of us already are. When you get a chance, sit down and study Shechem, the town and all the connections. You'll find there's a lot more than what we're going through here. I just don't have time to go through it all. But I wanted to touch on it because I wanted to spur your interest to go and check it out. Bethel and Ai. And from there, he moved to the mountains east of Bethel, and he pitched his tent in Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. And he built there an altar to Yahweh and called on the name of Yahweh. This altar is in a very strategic location. And believe it or not, it still remains to this very day. Now, most English translations read here that he called on the name of Yahweh, right? Now, what you got in your Bibles? Y'all read that? But according to the Stone Edition Tanakh and the Hebrew Chaldee Lexicon, the better translation of the Hebrew would actually read, and invoked the name of Yahweh. Now, invoke means to call forth, to summon, to petition, or to appeal to. So Abraham worshiped there and called forth and petitioned Yahweh. Bethel was later to be named so by Jacob, Abraham's grandson. And Bethel literally means the house of Elohim, house of God. Now, this other little town that you're talking about, this Aiel, was the city of the Amorites, one of the Canaanite tribes. The name Aiel literally means to twist, to distort, to pervert, to commit iniquity, and to heap up into ruins. So at this moment in Abram's life, he's literally camped between a rock and a hard place. Literally. The rock being Yeshua, Bethel, and a hard place being the world, which is Aiel. Literally where he's at. Gives a little meaning to the word, to the scripture than when the master said, Lord, keep these disciples that you have given me in the world, but not of the world. You're literally seeing it right here, where Abraham's camped at. On one side you got Bethel, the other side you got Al. And you could have went either way. I mean, literally, you can walk over here, you can walk over there. Still having to make a choice all along the way. Abraham's sister. You guys remember this? How are we tracking here? Oh, yeah, we're good. Genesis 12, 19 through 13. Abraham set out, continued towards the south, and a scarcity of food came to be in the land, and Abram went down to Egypt to dwell there. For the scarcity of food was severe in the land, and it came to be, when he was close to entering Egypt, that he said to Sarah his wife, See, I know that you are a fair woman to look at. And it shall be, when the Egyptians see you, that they shall say, This is his wife. And they shall kill me, but let you live. Please say that you are my sister, so that it shall be well with me for your sake, and my life be spared because of you. Now, why in the world would he say that? Why? A lie? This is the patriarch. Exactly. Could have been. So, why did he lie? Or as Joe pointed out, was it really a lie? Genesis 20:12 says, And yet she is truly my sister. She is the daughter of my father, but not the daughter of my mother. And she became my wife. So she's his half-sister. So it wasn't exactly a lie, but it wasn't exactly, on the up and up either, okay? Technically, it wasn't a lie, but technically it wasn't exactly totally honest either. So this is interesting. The rabbis have something to say about this. They say that since Egypt was a lawless and sinful society, that this plan was the best way to ensure favorable treatment for both of them. Abraham knew that the Egyptians would find her to be an exotic beauty and would leave her alone if they were married. But if he had died by accidentally falling on somebody's sword or accidentally falling on somebody's spear, the woman would no longer be married and thus be fair game, like you can accidentally fall on a sword. So, that's their explanation for why he did what he did. Well, interesting thing about it is this thing is debated. Every year in this Torah portion, this is debated by rabbis, it's debated by Talmudim, it's debated by elders, it's debated by parents, it's debated by people in their houses around their table. They always talk about this because it wasn't exactly a lie, but it wasn't exactly truthful. Okay? It was kind of deceitful. And we're going to read what all happens on it. And when we get to the end, there's going to be some arguments here, and I'm going to share them with you. So, Genesis 12:14-20 says, "And it came to be when Abraham came to Egypt that the Egyptians saw the woman, that she was very fair. And Pharaoh's office saw her and praised her before Pharaoh, and the woman was taken to Pharaoh's house. And he treated Abraham well for her sake. And he had sheep and cattle and male donkeys and male and female servants and female donkeys and camels. But Yahweh plagued Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarai, Abram's wife. And Pharaoh called Abram and said, 'What is this that you have done to me? Why did you not inform me that she was your wife? Why did you say, she is my sister? And so I was going to take her for my wife. Look, here is your wife. Take her and go.' And Pharaoh commanded his men concerning him, and they went away with his wife and all that he had." So, why did God bless this little white lie? Or was it? So, the guys normally are really quick to point out, well, it worked out pretty good. They're always pretty quick to point that out. It worked out pretty good. I mean, he wound up with all that stuff, right? Now he's rich now. So it worked out pretty good, right? Well, let's see how well it worked out. Ladies, let me ask you something. You realize Sarah's 65 years old here, right? She must have been an exceptionally beautiful woman for Pharaoh to find her attractive at 65 years old, right? Must have been. 65 years old. Now, most women would read that and go, well, she lived longer, so she probably looked like she was 20. Okay, maybe so. Or maybe beauty is more than just youth. I believe what made her beautiful was the fact that she trusted Yahweh. That's what made her so desirable. Isn't that what Torah teaches us? You find a wife. Yeah, she did. Sure did. Abraham returned home a very wealthy man, as Pharaoh allowed him to keep all the possessions that he had acquired while in Egypt. So yeah, you might agree with the guys and say, well, it worked out pretty great for Abraham, didn't it? But did it really? Does anybody remember what one of the things that he was given was? He was given a maidservant for Sarai by the name of Hagar. So maybe that, well, she was my sister, wasn't such a good thing after all. Because through Hagar we get Ishmael. And through Ishmael we get the Muslim kingdom. And if you remember, it says with Ishmael, it says his hand would be, he'd be a wild man, and his hand would be against everybody, and everybody would be against him. That's what we got because of this. Because of that, technically not a lie, but dishonesty. Okay, so now we're back with resources. Genesis 13, 1-4. And Abram went up from Egypt in the south, and he and his wife and all that he had, and Lot with him. And Abraham was very rich in livestock and silver and gold. Why? Because he lied. And he went out on his journey from the south as far as Bethel, to the place where his tent had been at the beginning, between Bethel and Ai, to place this in the place of the altar which he had made there at first. And there Abram called on the name of the Lord again. So he went right back between the rock and the hard place. That's where he went back to. Back to that altar, talk to God. Probably a good idea. See, Yahweh blessed Abraham's plan. He goes into Egypt, which coincidentally means constriction or bondage, to escape the famine, and comes out even greater wealth. We see the same thing repeated 2 generations later. When Jacob went down to Egypt to be delivered from the famine, at first his family chose to stay there, and then bondage came upon them. Wow, what a surprise. Egypt means bondage. They wound up in bondage. But when Yahweh sent Moshe to deliver them, they came out with great wealth. Why? Because Pharaoh gave them all that wealth. Remember? They spoiled everybody. They wanted them gone so bad they were giving them everything. Take it all. Take my kid too. I don't care. Just get out of here. They wanted them gone. So Abraham returns to the place and the altar he previously built between Bethel and Ar, which today is called Ha-Avron, which means the mountain of Abraham. Here again, Abraham invokes or petitions the name of Yahweh. We tracking? You guys track along with me? Have I lost you yet? Have you? I think he went back to between the rock and the hard place there to seek counsel from Yahweh on what to do, because once again, it was his idea to say, she's my sister. God never told him to say that. Which I believe you're probably right, does show a little bit of lack of faith there or understanding. Yep, he has to go back and make a choice. Is to go back and renew that covenant and rely on God again. See, along your pathway, as you're walking out this Torah, sometimes you're going to make choices on your own that don't work out too well. Not something we should do, but let's face it, as human beings, we mess up. It's important when you make those mistakes to return back to that place and call on the name of Yahweh and get back right again. Because if you keep going down that pathway, you might wind up with 2 or 3 Hagars. So, once again, just like Proverbs says, a righteous man falls down 7 times and gets back up. So what makes him righteous? The falling down or the getting up? So let's talk about Lot for a minute. We've kind of got away from him in this study. Let's talk about him for a minute. Genesis 12:5 says, And Abraham took Sarah his wife and Lot his brother's son and all their possessions that they had gathered and the beings whom they had acquired in Haran, and they set out for the land of Canaan, and they came to the land of Canaan. Now, was it Abram's idea that Lot should accompany him? God say anything about it? The name of our Torah portion itself actually implies go for yourself, not take him with you. Right? So it seems that Abraham was commanded to leave his father's house by himself. As the story continues, we shall see how Lot becomes separated from Abraham's camp anyway, even though Abraham took him. Yes. Very good. It's very good. I'm going to also show you here in a second why Abraham thought it was okay to take him. Genesis 13:1, okay? It says, And Abraham went up from Egypt into the south, he and his wife and all that he had, and Lot went with him. You notice a change here in the wording? The order of the words as on the return to Egypt, it appears that there's a separation now between Abraham and Lot right here. Lot seems to be more of someone who's joined the group in the journey with them than someone that's part of it. Because of the way it's worded, it says, and Lot went with him. Almost like an afterthought. We see more proof of this in a few verses later when we see Lot's property referred to separately. Genesis 13:5 says, now Lot, who went with Abraham, also had flocks and herds and tents. Almost again as an afterthought. So, now since we know that Sarah was barren, according to 11:9, and Lot was Abraham's nephew, it would have been natural for Lot to have been considered as Abraham's son and an heir. Because of the law says that what? He had no father. So his next of kin is who would have had to take him and raise him. That's the reason why Lot's with Abraham. Abraham raised him because his father was dead. The same reason why if your brother dies before he has a son with his wife, you as a son, as his brother, must raise up seed in his name with his wife. And that's not your kid, it's his. To make sure that his inheritance doesn't go away. Because without an heir, everything that his wife has left will be gone when she dies. Gone. You have to have an heir to pass it on to. So it is your duty as a brother to raise up your brother's son. Which is exactly what you're seeing here with Lot. So, he would have understood, since he said, go to this land and I'll make you a great nation, he would assume that Lot, since he's considered him as his son, would go with him, right? Therefore, Genesis 12:7 says, and Yahweh appeared to Abram and said, to your seed I give this land. And he built there an altar to Yahweh who had appeared unto him. It says, then came the famine, and Abraham and Lot ended up in Egypt, in the wealthy and prospering Egypt. Lot became aware of a very disappointing dream of Canaan. While they were down in Egypt, he got to looking around. He got to seeing that Egypt looks pretty good. Looks real good. Maybe this Canaan's a pipe dream. In Egypt, a shepherd would not have to be constantly wandering around with his flocks anymore, helpless in the face of an unstable climate. Lot probably would have preferred to stay in Egypt. So Lot returns to Canaan and conflict arises at that point. There was no problem with them before. Everything was tracking along great until they went down to Egypt. Into that Egypt, that bonded place of bondage. Genesis 13:8-9 says, then Abraham said to Lot, please let there be no strife between you and me, and between my herdsmen and your herdsmen, for we are brothers. Please separate from me. Genesis 13:7. And there was strife between the herdsmen of Abraham's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock. So because Abraham understood that strife would destroy the blessings of Yahweh in his life, and as a lover of peace, he sought for a solution. We're supposed to be peacemakers, right? Abraham was willing to give up anything Lot asked for just to have peace restored in his life. There was no problems before that. Proverbs 17:1 says, better is a dry piece of bread and rest with it than a house filled with offerings of strife. See, in order to restore peace, however, like Abraham, we may need to sacrifice something important to us. And even be willing to accept an unjust situation, trusting that God will make up for it in his own way, in his own time. So do you do this? Are we Abraham or are we Lot? Sometimes you have to give up something you hold dear in order to get peace. And Lot lifted his eyes and saw all the plains of Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere. Before Yahweh destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, like the garden of Yahweh, like the land of Egypt, as you go towards Zoar. So Lot chose for himself all the plains of Jordan, and Lot moved east. Thus they separated from each other. Genesis 13, 10, and 11. So who chose the land? Lot chose for himself. He didn't. Who chose it? He said, Abraham told him, you choose. Choose which way you want to go, and I'll go the other way. Left it up to him. So that term, Lot lifts up his eyes and looks for the land that is similar to Egypt. Remember, they just came from there. He determined that the well-irrigated plains of the Jordan is as close as he can come to Egypt. So Lot chose what looks like Egypt to him. By doing this, he chooses a life independent of Yahweh. While the land given to Abraham is exactly the opposite. You can read it in Deuteronomy 11:10. It says, for the land which you are given to possess is not like the land of Egypt, from which you have come, where you sowed your seed and watered it by foot as a vegetable garden. But yet Lot's choosing property that looks exactly like Egypt. So let's take a look at where they're at right now at this separation. On the left, here's a map. Here's Hebron. This is where Abraham is at. This is where Lot chose, Sodom. Do you see where that's located on the map? This little body of water right here, that's the Dead Sea. So Sodom and Gomorrah were right below the Dead Sea. Here's a picture of what is believed to be Sodom right here. And as you can see, it is very fertile and beautiful. It is full of water, green grass, beautiful, 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 perfect for herding and all that, right? Be perfect for what they're doing. The location where Sodom and Gomorrah were situated before they were destroyed was indeed water everywhere by the Jordan River. The Jordan plain was very similar to the land of Egypt, which also enjoyed the abundance of the water of a river. The contradiction lies at the spiritual level here. In the book of Deuteronomy, it is implied that the land of Israel, which drinks water from the rain of heaven, is superior to Egypt, which is watered as a vegetable garden. The verse in Genesis we just read, however, praises the land that is watered like a garden, that is a river, not heaven. It even compares the garden of Yahweh with the land of Egypt. This is Lot's assessment. He totally chose something totally different than what God promised. Totally opposite. Now, after Lot had separated from him, Yahweh said to Abraham, now lift up your eyes and look from the place where you are, northward, southward, eastward, westward. For all the land which you see, I shall give to you and your seed forever. Arise, walk in the land through its length and its width, for I give it to you. See, Abraham gave Lot first pick of the land and accepted whatever was left over. Lot did not inquire after Yahweh for directions, nor did he seek counsel from Abraham. He relied on his own personal pleasure and preference, and was drawn to that which was attractive to his eyes. Lust. The land he chose looked lush and green and fertile. He gave Abraham the leftover brown, barren, dry land. That old nasty looking stuff. Abraham, however, walked by faith and not by sight. He was unmoved by the appearance of the land left over because he trusted in Yahweh. The land that Lot chose ended up completely destroyed due to its depravity. Sodom and Gomorrah. But Abraham prospered in the land because he believed Yahweh's promises. Do we believe in the promises of Yah? Do we? Or do we merely rely upon what we see? What is the lesson here? Both of these men came from the same place, the same family, had the benefit of learning under the same teacher, and spent half their lives together. They were given the same choices to make. So what is the lesson here? It all comes down to choice. It all comes down to choice. Nope. That's right. You have to make choices. Are you making choices after the lust of your eyes? Are you making choices based upon what seems to be right in your own eyes? We know what Scripture says about that. Are we making choices based upon what we talked to so-and-so and he said that would probably be best? Or are we trusting in God? It doesn't matter how long you spend in Torah. It doesn't matter how many years you study. It doesn't matter who you study under. It matters the choices that you make along the way. That's going to lead you one way or the other. Now, are choices permanent? Sometimes they are. Sometimes you're given an opportunity to write that choice. Be Abraham. Don't be Lot. Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you for watching a teaching from Emet HaTorah. If you are ever in the Odessa area, we would love to welcome you to our Shabbat service, 11 a.m. every Sabbath. For more information or for more teachings, feel free to find us on the web, www.emethatorahodessa.com. Also, you can find us on Facebook. Thank you. God bless you and your family. Shalom.